right now. Share screen. We are doing fun things tonight, everyone. Fun things.
So am I waiting for the ringtone?
It is not, you can't hear it. It's playing right now. You can't hear it.
All right, so I'm going to read the opening then. Welcome, everybody. Give me a second. This is Unfragmented, inspired by Colossians. For by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him. And he is before all things, and by him all things consist. Join our book club as we pursue a more consistent Christian life. Welcome to Unfragmented, where Kevin R. Novak and I discuss a book each month. Join us as we explore the cohesions of things believed with things done. It is Thursday, January 12th, 2023. Give me a second to get back to my camera. All right. Can y'all see my face?
Yep, we see you.
So I'm so glad to be here tonight with Kevin and with Jennifer Courtney. Jennifer's can take my place. You might be able to hear it's really loud where I am right now, and this is why. I am in Kansas, and I'm about to do a 2-hour parent meeting, and I'm really excited. We're expecting a couple hundred people, and it's 7 o'clock, and they're filing in. And so it's a great time. Look, Kevin, I've got the book.
All right.
I'm going to tell them about it and encourage them to join us next Thursday night. So with that, I'm going to turn the conversation over to Jennifer and Kevin and just pray that all goes well. And I'm sure you're going to have a really good time. Kevin, I was hoping tonight you could really talk about the word establishment, kind of what you did around page 30, and explain to the audience the establishment clause in the Constitution and what it means to establish things as Christians. And with that, I'm going to sign off. Thanks, team.
Thanks,
Thanks, Leigh.
Leigh. Enjoy your time.
Thanks, Leigh.
Bye.
So, I had the privilege to be with Leigh last night when she was in Oklahoma City doing the same thing. We had a lovely crew of parents, and so it's a blessing for her to get to be able to do that. So I'll stand in for her tonight. So Kevin, you joined me for a little while on my last call, and on that call, the Words Aptly Spoken Book Club, we were talking about falling in love with books and being lifelong readers. And I know that you are also a lifelong reader. So tell us a bit about your love of books.
Yeah, I love books. And even before I became a believer, I fell in love with books. When I was in my 20s, I was still a big sports fan. And I didn't necessarily read when I was younger because I just didn't want to read I didn't want to read just because someone was telling me to read. But when I got in my 20s, I read a lot of sports biographies, and these are books about well-known basketball coaches like Pete Newell, John Wooden, Phil Jackson, Dean Smith. And the books inspired me so much. These are not necessarily all believers, but they did great things with their lives. And eventually when I became a Christian, I just took that inspiration about those biographies and thought to myself, I can do great things for the Lord. And so after that, it was a lot of theology and law books, but initially sports biographies is really what fueled my obsession with books. So.
Oh, I'm glad you shared that. I love hearing how the Lord weaves all our experiences together into where you are today. And you are doing great things for the Lord. And the theology and law readings and the sports biographies all just got woven together. That's great. Well, go ahead.
It's a mishmash.
Oh, I think anyone who reads a lot reads a mishmash. That's great. Thanks for sharing that. So every week on this show, we will consider a quotation. So this is our notable quotables segment. And we want to remind everyone that quotations are fragments of longer thoughts. And so whenever we share them, we want to encourage you to read more from the author that we've quoted so that you can get the full context of what they've really said. But we also know that taking out a quotation sparks our interest and inspires us. So would you like to share our notable quotable for tonight, Kevin?
Yeah, and this goes way back to Gertrude Himmelfarb's book called One Nation, Two Cultures. This was actually a book that was recommended by Newt Gingrich, not to me personally, but I listened to him speak when I was in Lynchburg, Virginia, many years ago, and he said that this was a good cultural book to read. So Gertrude Himmelfarb's book, One Nation, Two Cultures, this was published in 2001. And she writes this, quote, "There was a conversation between a minister who himself was a former gang member and the local drug dealer. The minister asked the drug dealer, 'Why did we lose you? Why are we losing other kids now?' And the drug dealer stares the minister in the eye and says, 'I'm there, you're not. When the kids go to school, I'm there, you're not. When the boy goes for a loaf of bread or wants a pair of sneakers or just somebody older to talk to or feel safe and strong around, I'm there, you're not. I'm there, you're not. I win, you lose," end quote.
Wow. That
And
reminds, oh, go ahead, Kevin.
it's something that I had talked about through the years in media through Deconstructing the Coliseum, and it just stuck with me that even before I was exposed to homeschooling, I realized, well, there is an opportunity cost to not being around our children as much as possible, and not necessarily being able to home educate them, but just discipling them. And if the drug dealer is going to understand that they need to be around children to get the children into their fold, well, we need to understand that as Christians. And so I would just emphasize that to our audience, most of which already understand that, but being around our children is huge.
Yeah, I love that. And just, and your emphasis on us being around our children, and the idea of the things that as Christians and as the church that we need to be present for. And so it reminded me when you shared this quotation that years ago, one of my students, in challenge 3 said, "Welfare is stupid." I said, "Well, first of all, stupid is a banned word in my community, and I'd like to know why you said what you did." And she said, well, and she went on, kind of repeated something probably she had heard. And then I said, "Well, if you don't want the state to take care of widows and orphans and people who are impoverished, then who should do it?"
Mm-hmm.
And she paused and said, "Oh, I guess we're supposed to do that as the church." So I thought about her words as you read this quote tonight.
Oh, that's good. And last week I gave an example of probation where, there is a connection we can see, not with just your example, but with what I do, where when we have fathers that are not doing what they need to do and lead the way they need to lead, because now the state has taken over that role, well, then we get a bigger civil government. And so I actually, if you don't mind me just sharing this recollection, I'm a big fan of Ronald Reagan. My 7-year-old is named Reagan. And so I just did a lot of reading about him. Well, when he was younger, he had some neighbors who I believe it was that the children, their parents died. And the Reagan family just took him in. That's just what people did. They took them in. And I understand that there are different conversations about safeguards for children and all that, but that's what people did. They took it upon themselves instead of necessarily making the state do it. So,
Yeah.
but I do want to visit just a few terms from last week and just do that briefly before we get into what everyone wants to talk about tonight. And we'll open it up here in just a few moments to our participants. And I do want you to feel welcome here. I have no problem with you disagreeing with me. In fact, I think with this particular issue, if you have friends that are struggling with this issue, invite them on and they can explore what this is all about. That's really what we need, is discussion on jurisdiction and government and so on. Last week, what I spoke about briefly was obviously the term abolition. What I mean by that is eliminating the civil government school system entirely. and also government. When I use the term government, I mean that generally. So in terms of there being different governments, family government, church government, and civil government, and they're all under the authority of Jesus. And I like to reference Isaiah 9:6 here, where Jesus is the government. He is the ultimate authority. So civil government isn't up here above everybody else. Civil government is down here under the authority of Jesus. And then jurisdiction, just briefly, jurisdiction essentially just means that each of those governments has a different function. So, family, we get the idea there where parents are supposed to lead and raise their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. The Father is specifically there, and disciple children. And then the church, of course, to spread the word and to bring into the mix young people or just people in general as part of the spiritual body. And then finally, the civil government has the jurisdiction of promoting good and punishing evildoers. And when I say promoting good, I don't mean providing good, but merely facilitating people exercising their duties owed to God. And when I say duties owed to God, I just mean rights. So if you understand that explanation, those explanations about those terms, you really, I think, can have a grasp of really what is in the book, the basics of what is in the book, and the big picture that I'm trying to communicate to people. And that is really that the civil government does not have as their duty owed to God teaching our children and discipling our children. And then finally, just the last term, and Leigh had talked about this before she went to speak, and that is the Christian establishment. Really, that is me quantifying or giving a term to Christian leaders who are either ignoring the issue or not wanting to discuss whether the civil government should be discipling our children. So we can talk more about that. And if anyone wants to ask a question about that, no problem. But those are the terms that I visited last week, and those essentially form the foundation for the whole book.
Yeah, I appreciate you going back over that, because we did define a lot of terms last week and left some off, and some people may be new participants, and in your definitions, you hit on something that's important to us in classical conversations. So we have a number of we believe statements that we give to our families, and one of them is that we believe that it's the duty of the parents to educate their children with the support of fellow believers, but that, just as you described, that's under our jurisdiction. So that's great. So I see some familiar faces from last time, and I see some new folks. So I just want to make sure that what is the argument that Kevin is developing in his book. And he's developing an argument for getting rid of public schools. And so that's the title, Abolition. And so although a lot of folks may agree with you, they may not know why until they read your book. And so you probably have yourself come across an author who says something better than you can say. And I would imagine that you're giving those words to other people too. So have you had that kind of experience as you've been sharing this book?
Yeah, and it is a nice feeling when someone says to me that they agree with me, they just didn't necessarily understand why. And I'm glad that I can do that for people. I'm not going to pretend that I do that for more people that have done that for me, because I have so many people that have read their books, and I just wish I could articulate myself the same way. And so I think for me, the one person that really developed my thoughts on these ideas in Christianity as a whole, and trying to apply the Bible to all areas of life, was Gary DeMar. And he's with a group called American Vision. He's been around for a long time. And I think that he just got me thinking about God. He wrote a series called God and Government in the 80s. It was a 3-volume series. I'm sure many of you have that. But Gary, for me, was someone that really was able to say what I was thinking, and that was refreshing. And by the way, this is probably not the best example, but I've been reading the Blueback Speller to my children before they go to bed at night. Everyone here probably has already read the Blueback Speller. But if you go to the back part of it, and these are the parts I've been reading to my children at night. They have separate sections on like generosity, and I think there's one on like hard work, just different virtues and so on. And when I read those, I think I really wish I could write this way. It's almost perfect writing, and that's refreshing to me. And those whomever wrote that way, they're saying the things that I really wish I could say.
Yeah, I love that. I love old stories for teaching our children about virtues. That's great. So I just want it. The chat box is already lighting up, Kevin. Clearly, people want to ask you a lot of questions. So I want to give them lots of time to do that. So I'm going to get the rest of my housekeeping out of the way so that we can get right to our participants' questions. So obviously, you've been on LeighBortins.com because you found us and joined this link. I just want to remind you that under each of there are 3 book clubs there. There's the Math Map happening on Monday nights at 8 p.m. There's Words Aptly Spoken happening on Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern, and here Unfragmented at 8. And the schedule for those books and links to where you can purchase the books are right there underneath each of those book club links. And I just wanted to remind our participants that tonight our sponsor is Classical Conversations. We do have weekly homeschool communities where families gather to practice classical Christian education and community. And if you want to find a community near you, you can visit classicalconversations.com and enter your zip code. We will have 2 more weeks of talking to Kevin about his book, Abolition. We wanted to spend a whole month on this. So if you were on the Words Aptly Spoken, we change books every week, but we're going a little deeper on this book club. And I think, Kevin, am I right that you have your first special guest next week?
Kerry Morgan will be on next week, and he's written 2 books. One is Real Choice, Real Freedom in American Education, and the other one is Origin of Civil Government. So yeah, he's an attorney in Michigan. He's a smart gentleman. He's done some work with the Supreme Court, but he will be on next week, and you can definitely, if I don't get through your questions this week, definitely come back next week and we can cover those, and Kerry will have some additional material he'll go over with us, but he might have a different way of explaining it, which might help. Sometimes it has just someone else explaining something to help us understand.
That's great. That'll be something for everyone to look forward to. Before we leap into what our book-loving friends want to talk about, I did want to introduce Timothy Knotts, who is here from my team, the curriculum development team. He is a homeschool dad and also has a degree he has his law degree. So we have lots in common amongst our friends tonight, loving books, loving freedoms, and knowing a little bit about legal ways of protecting those freedoms. So, all right, Julie, I've seen the chat box lighting up. So what do our friends want to talk about?
But yeah, I jumped in before you were even done, Kevin. Yeah, I mean, I think people have been marinating on these thoughts, but Sadie has a great question. I don't know, Sadie, if you want to ask her, Kevin, you can read that, something referred to on page 118 about, this, how can you change the civil government current jurisdiction if the current authority doesn't change? So maybe tackle that.
Sure. So Sadie, I do see there are multiple questions there. I think in terms of jurisdiction preempting delegation, I think what I'm trying to point out there is that it's important to frame, and if I don't address your issue directly, you can certainly let me know. But what I think I'm getting at there is when we are framing an issue improperly, that will not necessarily get us to the right answer. And when I say delegation, what I'm referring to there is a lot of people, and I understand, this is a difficult concept, but a lot of people are stuck on whether it's acceptable to send a child to a public school, to a civil government school. And so they'll debate that. And I even belonged to a church at one point where they told us, they told the congregation, we do not want you debating that because we do not want that to be divisive. And that's admirable. But my point to them was, you don't need to even debate that. What you should be teaching the congregation is that the Bible does not justify there being public schools. And that preempts you even needing to debate whether to send a child to a public school. Now, I understand that doesn't dispose of all the issues with how to get to getting rid of the public schools. I understand that. But in terms of galvanizing a congregation, you could at least say to the congregation, people, congregants, this is what the Bible tells us, you know, as best I can understand it, the civil government should not have public schools. If you have a child in the public school, we're going to help you and work with you on solving that issue. But what I'm trying to get people to understand is they don't need to be contentious or even debate the delegation issue, if that makes sense. So one preempts the other. And I might have mentioned last week, and this is a standard example that I use. If there's a false premise built in there about sending a child to a public school, because in it exists this assumption that there should be public schools. And sometimes I'll ask people, do you want me to punch you in the face or the stomach? And, you know, I'm just trying to be funny and light and everything, but there's a false premise in there in that I can punch you in the first place. And so that's really what I'm trying to get leaders to understand too, is I can put you at ease. You don't have to worry about your congregation fighting with one another. Talk to them about jurisdiction, and then it will totally preempt the delegation discussion. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you. That cleared it up. Thanks so much.
And then were there some other questions that you had? I if you don't mind, I'd rather hear you ask than have to read and avoid.
Yes, I was muted. My husband just came home and the dogs were barking.
Okay.
And if you want to go to somebody else's, I just put them in there because I just thought if we had time, we could answer them.
We
But
have time. Go ahead.
okay, well, I was really curious about how we can change the civil government's current jurisdiction if we can't change their authority. Like it goes back to, and I will not speak on this eloquently, but you talk about basically their perception is they have the authority, and you're making the argument that they don't, and I think it's a good argument. But if they don't accept that, how can we still affect change if the authority doesn't change? How can the jurisdiction change?
Yeah, you know, I'm glad you asked that, because I actually was in an email exchange just the last couple of days with a Christian leader on this. And I'm glad to have that exchange, because I know I can make progress on the issue, at least when a Christian leader is talking to me about it. And I think the answer to that is, we need to teach young people, and this is what I try to do. We need to teach people generally, and specifically Christians, about this particular issue of jurisdiction, that the civil government should not have public schools. And I think what will happen, and I think this because I've seen other movements play out this way, is if you can get people to understand the way things should be, then when they begin to gain a critical mass, not necessarily a majority of people, but a strong minority of people, some political will is the term often used, then we can go out into the political realm and begin to affect change that way. And now I do get involved with politics a little when I have to, but by and large, this is not, and I'm not saying you said this, but I think what happens a lot of times is people come across what I'm doing and they think it's a top-down legislative approach, thinking we're trying to force this on people instead of working on the grassroots level to build it up. But that really is what we're doing with shows like this, and with the book, and with going to homeschool conventions, just this is essentially a teaching ministry right now. And when we get enough people that understand the jurisdiction issue, we will begin to see different ways that people in different jurisdictions, different counties, different states, different cities, in their own ways, they will begin to, over time, implement these policies. And this is something we can talk about more later. But at the end of the book, I talk about how we really need to lower taxes, because if we lowered essentially real property taxes, it would get us pretty close to getting what we want. And then also getting rid of a lot of the education law. So those are two of the big mechanisms. But the short answer is we right now, we just need to build the political will. And I think over time we can get there. One of the promising things that we noticed, my wife actually did here in Texas, we actually have a lot of people running for office. And during primary season, I want to say, what would that have been? March, April, May. My wife did research on dozens and dozens of candidates. And you'd be surprised at how many of them in different ways articulated some of the things that I talk about. And maybe they didn't necessarily understand the issue maybe the way I do, because I've studied this and I've been doing it a lot longer, but in their own ways, they talked about this in their platform. And over time, we'll just see more and more of that. And I think that'll be the way that we undo this.
Thank you.
I do love, like, my favorite question was number 3 that she asked.
Oh,
So could you talk about whether a Christian should be a civil government teacher? And what about Christians in other federal jobs in comparison? So
sure.
that's a whopper.
That is a whopper, yeah. And I some of that. Now, I will say that in terms of a Christian being a civil government teacher, a civil government school teacher, I think if your goal is to go in there and be like salt and light, I don't think that's a good idea. Now, I understand, like, if it could, because I actually go to a church with at least one gentleman who he's an administrator in a public school and he wants to get out. And I do know that I don't want to share the story if she doesn't want me to, but I know that one of the volunteers with Deconstructing the Coliseum, her husband used to be a public school teacher and he got out. So if you're in the system and you need a paycheck to provide for your family, I think that's one thing. You need to have an exit plan. If you're in there trying to be salt and light, I don't think that's possible. Besides that, what I will challenge people on is, okay, that sounds good and admirable that you are in a civil government school trying to be salt and light. But isn't it true that you would be more effective in being salt and light in an environment where you do not have any legal limitations on what you can say to people about Jesus? And when I prompt them with that question, I just don't see where there's any way around that. The bigger whopper there, I think, is Christians in federal jobs. And I think I would probably just repeat what I said about paychecks. I don't pretend that everyone has the ability to move on right away. And, well over 90% of the people who work for the federal civil government in Washington, D.C. are, basically liberal Democrats. So I think that if people can get out, they should, and seek a path of lesser resistance and where they can express their Christianity in an environment where there are no legal limitations. That would be the advice that I would give people.
That's good. All right, Timothy, you're up. He had a great question.
Yeah, so last time we talked a little bit about rights and how they come from obligations, or they come from the natural relationships that exist. And do you think that if families and churches stepped up to do their jobs in for example, what you were just talking about, caring for people, maybe caring for elderly parents, caring for down and out neighbors, and particularly here in taking care of educating the next generation, that would alleviate some of this proliferation of rights that people think that they have, or that they pursue with government, thinking that they have rights to things when what they really are chasing after is entitlements.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good distinction. I'm glad you brought that up, because it's an equivocation is what that is. You mean one thing, but you're using a different word and passing it off as something legitimate. And I do think that if we begin to exercise our duties to a greater degree, that will alleviate some civil government overreach. However, one of the examples I like to use is FDR, the New Deal in the 40s, I think would have been the 1940s, and probably even the late 1930s, where he implemented Social Security and a lot of federal civil government overreach. I wasn't alive back then, so I can't necessarily say what the exact context and political environment was like back then. But I have heard people say, well, if the church was doing what they were supposed to be doing, then the New Deal never would have been implemented. And I don't buy that. And the reason why I don't buy that is because humanists are going to do what they want to do, and they're going to live out their worldview no matter what we say. So if a humanist is in power, and even if they don't have the legal authority to do something, but they have the power to do something, let's say to take care of widows and orphans. And even if they were to see Christians doing that, do I think they would say, well, the Christians are taking care of that, we're not going to do it? No, I don't think they would do that. They would do it anyway. And so I do think that we ought to be, to a greater degree, exercising our duties owed to God, specifically with your example, taking care of widows and orphans. But at some point, we're going to need to take on humanists that are acting against God's will. We're going to need to, at some point, whether it's 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, we're going to need to engage those people. It's inevitable, because we're going to need to take back the power that they gave themselves, that they really do not have biblically.
That's good. I did get a couple questions last time about this chart that you mentioned on your website. They were having trouble finding it or downloading it, or so if you want to tell me where it is, I might be able to find it on your website, and I'll post it here. If you want to just talk through it, I'll look.
Okay. I don't know exactly. Let me think here.
Do you remember, Sadie, what the chart was?
Yeah, it was a jurisdiction chart. I don't remember exactly where it is on the website. Would it be okay if I tried to find that after the show, and could we post it?
Sure.
Okay. And
this is a great thing to caveat to say, if you guys share your email in the chat log, we'll be able to just email it to you if you guys want it. That would be great.
Well, if any, and I see Nicole here posted. Nicole has been helping she's been helping us as a volunteer and working on promoting the show and so on. And I see the story that I shared a few moments ago about someone needing to get out of a civil government school as a teacher was Nicole's husband. So Nicole, I don't know if you feel like sharing a little about that, and maybe you have some tips for how you were able to accomplish that.
Yeah, so when I read your book, Kevin, and I remember you approached me about volunteering, and I was like, well, how can I be a volunteer for this mission I agree with, but my husband's still a teacher? And the thing you said to me that was my huge takeaway was about how we can start seeing things this way. And if my husband and I had been educated in the role of civil government that, our parents didn't really teach us that because they didn't know, and how kind of the pastors kind of, either failed in the responsibility or it was something they didn't know or how it is and didn't know how to teach the congregation about the proper role of civil government. So, it was just one of these long conversations that my husband and I had that, he's got to get out as we've just become more educated on just in general what the role is in education in the church and civil government. And eventually he was able to finish his last school year and has an at-home job.
Well, that's great. And I, when you told me that story, Nicole, I was like, wow, that's just, that is so inspiring to me, because I hear stories like this, and I'm sure everyone else does too, where you're at a homeschool convention, or, and it's mainly mothers doing the homeschooling and interacting with one another and sharing these stories where you're getting these tidbits here and there about movement. And I think this is also going to help us move in the direction of eventually having a greater political will to accomplish what we need to accomplish. And so when we get teachers out and then they either go to have jobs where they can express themselves biblically, or even go to start a Christian school, that's really what we want. We want to be building infrastructure, and Classical Conversations, having been around for a long time, is a good example of that, building different infrastructure, building different options for people, and just giving people alternatives. One of the things that I've been working on lately, and Nicole, eventually, I hate to dump this on you now, but eventually you might be assisting us with our scholarship fund. And we're trying to build, we plan on starting a scholarship fund this March. And that's one of the mechanisms that we want to try and help people with. And so we're seeing more and more of that now. I can't keep up with all the groups and people that jump into this issue, because as adults, they're beginning to realize, like, this is what we need to do. We're not only just going to get our kids up, but we're going to begin educating ourselves, and we're going to be taking back ground. So it's an exciting thing, but so many people have stories just like Nicole.
Yeah, that's so good. I'm so challenged. I've just started working with Sadie in my new role, and I'm so challenged. I've been so challenged by some of the things she's said or encouraged, and I love what she just typed. I've always felt homeschooling is the default. It's not the calling. And how many times have I said, "Oh, I've been called to homeschool"? I think we've all said that probably, but to look at it as the default, as this is actually our job, our duty. This is our worship to the Lord, is to embrace that mandate. I mean, it's an imperative. Teach your, it's the command part of the essentials of the English language. And the implied noun there is you teach your children. It's not, you can't fill that in with anything else. That's not how the language works. So I love this, this just consideration of the words that we use. And I know last week, Leigh, her saying, well, this is unconstitutional. Well, why aren't we saying this is unbiblical? This is not scriptural. This is not what Christ has called us to do. So such a good conversation to have. Thank you, Sadie.
Well,
Kevin, can I ask?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Just a question on how do we practically abolish the public school system, kind of step by step? You gave two like larger principles, but can you break it down maybe from a political perspective, or how do we go about it as citizens?
Well, I always think it's best to start local, and I'm not sure what state you're in. Every state, has a different, well, basically the county or city level is really what it comes down to.
Okay.
But I would engage those people. One of the things I used to do was, and I this was in my early days where I was a little more brash and aggressive. but I would go to the school board meetings, and actually, you know, I on our website, you can actually go where I posted a script where you can read. It's about 3 minutes long. You can go to your school board meetings and tell them that they don't have jurisdiction to have public schools. Now, you don't necessarily have to do that, because I don't know how much progress you're going to make in that regard. Like I said, I did it because I was right out of the gate and I just was looking for things to do. But I would start with your local people, maybe put together a letter. We've got materials on the website you could just print. I can send you some brochures if you email us. You can email me at kevin@deconstructingthecoliseum.com, and we get you some brochures. They're very simple. I don't have any in front of me right now, but you could definitely just hand those out to people and keep them in your car whenever you go to your homeschool group or whatever. Just give them out to people. I'm always giving out homeschool magazines that I get for free from Paul and Gina Suarez. So I would just don't kill yourself trying to abolish public schools. What I would do is just take a very incremental approach in engaging those people around you on whether there should be public schools. And I think, because that's my goal. When I go to a homeschool convention and I have 50 people there, I'm like, wow, there are 50 people here now that are really going to suddenly be confronted with this question of whether there should be public schools. And I think if you're doing that with your family and your friends and your neighbors and your homeschool people, then that's going to be huge. So I would just suggest starting there.
So overall, getting the word out, getting it out locally, getting it out to those in your sphere of influence, and potentially the oh goodness, what did you, homeschool boards, or I'm not boards,
the school boards.
School boards, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and you know, I think it might be better for you if you deal with people that you think you can make some progress with.
Yeah.
Because I probably did in the beginning when I first started this years ago, I probably did work unnecessarily. I probably made it harder on myself, but I didn't have any one that I knew was doing this. So I just kind of went out and did stuff. And like I said, I was very aggressive about it, but I would, if I were you, I would just engage those people around you. We had a party on January 1st. We always have a party at the house here on January 1st. And This got materials. So people come to the house, hey, take a brochure, take a homeschool magazine, you know, here's this new show we're doing, this book club. So, but I would, as best you can, prompt them on the issue of whether there should be public schools, because you're probably around a lot of people who are already homeschooling and so on. But get those people to think more deeply, because they're the ones who can take it to the next step. And that's why I tell people, you know, we've got this Deuteronomy generational concept where it's not enough just to teach our children the Christian worldview. We need to teach them that they need to make progress. And so we need to teach our children that there shouldn't be public schools. So
yeah, I actually had an interesting conversation yesterday with Diane Douglas, you know, from the vouchers pamphlet. And she said initially she was trying to be in charge of the board of supervisors of education in Arizona. And she worked in education for 30 years. She was hoping to reform the public school education system. And she just said, I've now learned that I can't. It's too broken. It's too broken. And she's a believer too. And she said, I wanted to try to fix it from the inside and help these kids and help these teachers and so forth. And she said, after 3 decades, I realized it can't be salvaged. It can't be reformed. We just have to get rid of it. I thought that was very intriguing to hear after somebody who spent decades.
Yes, empower people to not send their kids there, and then it'll go away. I mean, you know, so just these words, these conversations, you know, things that Kevin says, we can take and learn something and research it. You know, I definitely will be looking up some things that Kevin's talking about. You know, don't take his word for it. Go look it up for yourself, what the Bible says about education. So
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Well, sadly, as always, we
We are
are
out of time.
out of time too
How
soon.
can that be?
But I really appreciate it. So I know we have a question, Sadie, if you can hold that one until next week. So write it down where you won't forget it. And we'll have the chat log too. But I really appreciated what you said here toward the end, Kevin, about just talking to people that you can make progress with, and that idea of all of us taking our sphere of influence and doing something with that. And that is kind of the motto of our book club here, that a few people with a lot of faith can change the course of culture. And so you can go to leighbortins.com or Kevin's website, destructingthecoliseum.com, to join the book club next week. We'll get to the questions we didn't get to tonight, and we'll hear from Carrie Morgan as well. So thanks for joining
And just
us.
real quick,
Oh, sorry, Julie.
if you want to listen to this again, it's recorded. It will be archived. If you go to that last square, you'll be able to listen to this as many times as you want. So if you need another round, hear Kevin again, it'll be, all of these are recorded, so you can visit it again.
It's great. Share it with a friend too. So
Yep.
Thank you, everybody.
thanks.
Thanks, Kevin. Have a
Okay,
great night.
See you next week.
Yeah. Good night, guys.
Goodbye.